Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glicini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 20. My guest is Ken Miller, the best high school club lacrosse director in the country. Ken not only owns and runs the oldest club team in the nation, the Long Island Sting, for the last 26 years. He has worked on Wall Street for over a quarter century and is currently with Morgan Stanley. Ken played collegiate lacrosse at the University of North Carolina, spent 10 years in the modeling industry after college, and presently owns and runs Everest Recruiting Consulting, where he has worked with over 500 student athletes, including myself over a decade ago. I remained one of over 1,000 high school student athletes Ken has helped get recruited to play lacrosse at the next level. Ken is not only an expert in the recruiting process, he's a devoted father of 4 children who have all played lacrosse. Outside of everyday work, Ken is an avid surfer and triathlete with a deep appreciation for work ethic and performance. Lastly, he is a longtime mentor of mine and close friend, so it's a privilege for me to have him on here today. Coach, thanks for making the time to come on.
My pleasure, brother. And let me tell you right up front, I'm extremely proud of you, of what you've done and what you've become and where you're headed.
Thank you.
You walk
Coach.
the walk, you talk the talk.
Appreciate that.
All right? My pleasure, man.
From the first day I met you, which was when I was a 17-year-old junior in high school, you've always had an affinity for toughness and working hard. Where would you say that came from? Who and what influences instilled that in you?
I mean, that's a pretty easy one. And I think it's somewhat common for a lot of people, their parents. You know, my father was a carpenter, hard ass, worked from, up at 5 a.m, came home at 6 p.m, took a shower, went out and did alterations on his own. His work ethic just had a major effect on me. And my mother was a homeowner, a housewife, excuse me. My mother's brilliant. She's 92 years old. She's on Instagram. She's on Facebook. She calls me about politics and her opinions on Trump and this and that. But they both had a great effect on me because I had a great upbringing, sports and surfing, and great parents, and I couldn't have asked for more.
That was awesome. I was turned on to this book called The Seasons of a Man's Life, and it was so powerful to me because it talks about the dire need for mentorship. I think it's something that flies under the radar, but in the same way that a child needs good parenting, like you're talking about, young individuals that are coming out of college or looking to find their craft need a little bit more mentorship. You've certainly been one of those for me, but it just points out to the influences in your life outside of the natural genes and ability are such a big influence. One of the things that comes to mind for me is you have such a great way of connecting with high school student athletes like I was and guiding them to make the right decisions about college, sports, and life. Could you elaborate on the chapters of your life of high school and at UNC, and perhaps how those experiences allow you to do what you do for your players at such a high level?
Yeah, by all means. So can you hear my dog barking in the background there?
I can, yeah. It's okay.
Black light. I apologize. So, I was somewhat highly recruited out of high school. And my primary school of choice was UPenn, but I didn't have the grades to get in there. And I would not say that UNC was necessarily my second choice, but it was a choice that became number one once I took my official visit, because my cousin, interestingly enough, was a football player down there and a basketball player. Well, very few kids can play those two sports in the ACC. And when I took my official visit down there, I spent a lot of time with him and I fell in love with the campus. anyone who's visited that school knows that this campus is magnificent. The surroundings are incredible, the ACC basketball, the football stadium. But to a greater extent, the thing I really benefited from was my first coach, a guy named Fred Mueller. And this was a tough, hard-ass, demanding guy who also happened to be the linebacker coach for the football team. So there was no middle ground with him. And I really liked the guy. I was so flattered that, they offered me a spot there. But I had a rude awakening, which had a great impact on my life. As a freshman, I get down there thinking I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. And of course, I'm surrounded by 45 other pretty damn good athletes. And I remember this like it was yesterday, and I tell the story to a lot of my players and when I speak in front of kids. UNC in August, September, the heat is oppressive, right? It's brutal. And after every practice, we had to do our 440 splits, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And invariably, I was coming in last or second to last for the attack group. And I remember one day, I was like the 6th, 7th, 8th practice. There I am after my 4th 440 split. And my hands are on my knees. I'm trying to suck in oxygen. And the coach in front of everyone in his booming voice says, "Miller, you're an embarrassment. You're an embarrassment. You're not an athlete. You're not in shape." And my ears were red. And I know that everyone else on the team was just keeping their head down because they didn't want to be the next one who got Coach Mueller's wrath. However, I can tell you without any hesitation, that changed my life. And here's how it did. I said to myself when I got home that night, went back to my dorm, I would never be out of shape again. So I graduated from college over 30 years ago. I have not, well, let's put it this way. I could count on one hand how many times I've missed a workout in my life since I graduated from college. Of course, when I was sick or, I had some issues, I was in an accident. I'll discuss that with you later. But it had such an impact on me that he changed my life. And I've been dedicated to fitness, as you well know, my whole life. And were it not for him eviscerating me and calling me to task and basically saying, "Man up," I don't know what I would have done when I graduated from college. I don't know whether I would have been so dedicated to fitness. So that was a great experience. I go back every year. My wife also went to UNC. Both of my kids, my oldest kids, my son, daughter, were recruited by UNC. They chose not to go there, which was a little disappointing. But look, man, your experience at Yale, best days of your life, playing for Andy. My experience at UNC, never forget them. Never forget them.
There's a lot to take away there, Coach. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is the power of the single idea. As I get deeper and deeper into applied psychology, you start to understand that two things really move a person. It's either this direct need for pleasure or avoidance of pain. And I'm always telling people to raise their rock bottom, because why did it take you 6 or 7 sessions of running those 440 splits to finally get chewed out and then change your life? Because your rock bottom was lower than what you were willing to withstand. There's this silly story, but it goes directly hand in hand. There's a young boy sitting down next to his dog on a porch, and the dog is whining because it's sitting on a nail. And the neighbor goes, "What's wrong with that dog? Why doesn't it stop crying like that?" And he goes, "Oh, they were doing some construction on the porch, and the dog's sitting on a nail. I think it's a loose nail, and it's hurting him a little bit." And the neighbor says, "Well, why doesn't the dog move? I'm sick of it whining." And the little boy says, "Because I guess it doesn't hurt enough yet." And how does that metaphor go hand in hand with us in life, right? And I'm listening to your story. It's like it takes you to be called a total embarrassment and it's totally changed your life. And that breakdown has led to a breakthrough. I do want to go to a better point. Is one of the keys that stand out about you is like how much you're involved in, and you're an avid surfer, you're a triathlete, you're a father of 4 kids, a family man. You essentially have 3 to 4 jobs, but one of the keys to life is time management. So how do you balance it all? Are there any particular strategies you use to manage your time so well and be so productive in so many areas?
Yeah, so there's an easy answer to that. With 4 kids, when my kids were young, I made a decision at one point that I had to get control of my priorities in life because I spent a lot of time on the road. And so one of the books I read, I can't remember the author now, it spoke about time management. So I actually created my own weekly sheets that I made on my own. And every Sunday night, I actually fill the sheets in, or you can see it right now. This is my weekly sheet.
Wow.
It has my workouts, whether I'm doing cardio, whether I'm doing weight training. It has my appointments, and everything else that is important. I notice, you note there on Sunday, my son's coming home at 3:20 from LA. So I put everything down in front of me, and, I look at it every night and I say, okay, what's up tomorrow? So that I found to be very effective by writing it down and looking at it every day when I sit down on my desk.
I mean,
that's helped in a big way.
Yeah, that's just an embodiment of preparation. And I mean, I was looking for a good answer, and you gave me a great one. For those that'll just be listening to this later, it was a color-coded, charted off sheet with more detail than you could imagine. I want to dive a little bit deeper into how we met, Coach, how we connected, and to this day, we work in lacrosse together. First, what is it about the sport that you love and or has kept you involved in it for so long?
Well, first of all, I love competition. And I love coaching. I mean, when you think about it, as you articulated earlier, I've coached over 1,000 kids and then some. And the relationships that I've made, not only with the student athletes, but with their parents, I mean, it's invaluable. I mean, what was the likelihood of you and I meeting, or me meeting your dad and your mom, or me meeting Quinn, or Tinto I would have met because, he's a punk around town, and I would end up with a fight with him. But just the ability year in, year out to meet 15, 25, 30 new kids, new families, it's invaluable, man. And I love it. And I think, the most gratifying part about all this, as you well know, a lot of my kids end up at pretty goddamn good schools. And, I had 6 kids on the Yale national championship team, 6 of my former players. I mean, that's incredible. Teddy Forrest and Owen Jones and those guys sent me a poster with their names. They all signed it. I mean, stuff's great, man.
That's what it's all about.
You know what? I would not rather do anything else than coach. I love it. And I'll continue to do it as long as I can. And
you're excellent at it. One of the things that I don't want to let go that you just kind of breezed over, but I want to pull on the thread a little bit more, is how you love competition. UNC coach Anson Dorrance said that you can win anything at the high school and collegiate level if you have more competitive fire than your opponent. And I'm a strong believer in the power of competitiveness. I know it to be true about me, about the athletes I work with, and the people I've seen. They all have that competitive fire. Where do you think yours came from? Your competitive fire?
Well, Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because I think it's been an organic process. But I'll give you an answer that you probably need. So, once I stopped playing lacrosse, I found myself with somewhat of a void. So I started boxing, and I started training over at Gleason's gym, and I freaking loved it. And I joined the Wall Street boxing matches. I don't know if they have them anymore, but you actually got to fight at the New York Athletic Club, and then the winners would end up at Madison Square Garden the night of the championships, right? I couldn't get enough of it. My office was right next to Gleason's gym. I had a trainer. I went over to my lunch hour. The guy humiliated me. He was screaming at me, "Yeah, you pussy Wall Street punk. You can't do crap. Do it this way. Listen to me." But I loved it, right? And I ended up having my first 2 fights. I knocked both the guys out. Third fight, I got knocked out. Out cold on my back. But I still loved it. So I continued anything I could do to be in a competitive vein. That led me to the triathlons, because anyone who's done them, they're not easy. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of dedication. I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get my run or my ride in religiously. Weekends, I would do, bricks where I'd run 6 to 8 miles and then bike 25 miles. And it was torturous, but I loved it. Now, when it came to the races, I sucked. I've never been a great runner, and I'm a horrible swimmer, but that's not the point.
Not the point.
You challenge yourself, and the experience of always failing and then getting up and then pushing harder. And, then you also have to learn about nutrition, because you cannot train and you can't have your body at the peak level if you're just going to, drink beer, go out and run. And so I adopted a very clean diet, which I still maintain today. I'm always at the cutting edge with supplements. And I remember the story when we had those supplement guys come to our sting practice.
Changed my life.
That was, I always tell people that story. I remember when I said to the guys, when they asked me if they could come to our practice and present their new product line, I said, yeah, okay, there's going to be a quid pro. I'm going to pick 2 of my kids, and you have to train them, and you have to give them supplementation. That was you, and I don't remember who the other kid was. But you put on like 14 pounds of muscle.
21.
21 pounds? And I remember to this day, when you came back in the fall, I'm like, holy crap. I mean, your traps were through your shirt, your biceps were popping. And I remember Baxter from Yale, who was watching at the tournament, saying to me, "Kid Glicini's a beast." I'm like, yeah, no shit. He is a beast. So this whole thing about competition, the beauty of it is it takes you into other areas, other quadrants that you wouldn't necessarily step into unless you challenge yourself. And finally, one of the key phrases that I always repeat to myself, and I have it all over my house. As a matter of fact, as we speak, I'm looking at one of the pictures on the wall that I have. I have one on the steering wheel of my car, the same phrase, one in my shower, and it says, "Suffering produces endurance." And I honestly believe that. So competition breeds a certain amount of intensity in the soul, and you learn to endure and suffer, and it makes you stronger. Long-winded answer to your simple question.
No, it's a perfect answer, Coach. You are one of the best psychotherapists that ever lived. Carl Jung has a quote that I bring up often, and it goes hand in hand with your suffering produces endurance, because you're talking about the suffering in which you cause on yourself, and it's moderate to high, and you're in control of it, and all that kind of suffering. Carl Jung says the root of all mental illness is the inability to experience any real pain. And I think that's a really powerful point, that if you're willing to suffer a little bit, you're going to find a lot of yourself. One of my favorite quotes that goes along with what you're talking about is, it's not what we get from it, it's who we become by it. And I think that's huge, because the void you're talking about, I've had it in my life. The best example I see every day is my best friend. His name is Anka Tezcan. He's an Ironman athlete. No one really outworks him that I really know. And he was playing semi-professional soccer, got tendonitis in his foot, was feeling that same void that you talked about. And now he's a top 5% Ironman athlete for his age group, right? And we're talking midday here, and he's already finished his swim, bike, and run for the day, right? Just to get started, right? So we're all on the same page. And I love your idea, right? The metaphor you said, that it takes you into those different areas of your life, nutrition, then it does another thing for you, and it's momentous in that way. And anybody who's listening to this, I hope that if you have that void, that you pick something up that's mild suffering that you can produce endurance from. So shifting gears back to the lacrosse for a second, to this day, my father touts your praises as an expert evaluator of the whole student athlete. He says through the Everest Recruiting Consulting, you knew I had a chance to play at the Ivy League from my transcript and play on the field right away. Can you please share your what you look for when assessing elite high school student athletes, and how you use those assessments to judge where an athlete could play at the next level?
Yeah, so I'll tell you something. What I often say to the parents is this: I'm not the arbiter of talent, right? Because a lot of parents would come to me and say, hey, can my son play Division I lacrosse? My response is, I have no idea. I'm not the Division I college coach. That's up to that coach to make that judgment. However, there are a lot of things that you have to do to put yourself in a position to potentially be seen by that coach and push your narrative out, right? Look, your dad would be the first to admit, and your dad's a pretty sharp guy, and your mother's very sharp, but recruiting is a freaking bitch. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care if you're an M&A banker, a top attorney, a carpenter, an electrician. It's brutal for everybody. So my whole approach to this thing, well, I should back up. So what precipitated me getting involved in it was my daughter was very, very highly recruited. She was an All-American in high school, recruited by all the big schools. And during that recruiting process, man, I was in over my head, and it didn't feel good, because you love your children, you want the best for them. But I'm telling you, man, I could not make sense of what the hell was going on around me. And somewhat of an epiphany when my daughter was being recruited by the Ivies. I was reasonably convinced that she had no chance, because she only had about a 1280 on her SATs, I think it was. And I was thinking, okay, there's no way she gets into, a Princeton, a Penn, a Dartmouth, all these schools are recruiting her. And then someone said to me, well, there's something called a slot, right? Preferred admissions. And fortuitously, I read an article almost that same weekend about a consulting firm in New York City called Ivywise, run by this very sharp woman named Catherine Cohen, former admissions reader at Brown. And I called her up, and she has an a la carte service where she'll help you with your resume, help you with your essays, help you with your SAT prep, whatever it was. Long story short, when I went down there with my daughter and my wife and met this woman, Catherine Cohen, and turned my daughter over to her, Catherine Cohen says to me, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, why don't you guys go out and have some lunch? Come back in about 2 hours. Kate and I got this. And I exhaled. It was the first time I felt like someone really cared about my daughter and knew what the hell they were talking about during this very critical phase in her life, right? And then I said to myself, fast forward, that's a great value add, rather than the usual lacrosse club model where you try and monetize the team. I thought it would be smarter to add value to parents and guide them through the process from beginning to end, rather than say, write me a check for, whatever it is, $4,000 or $5,000 to join my club team. That's not wrong. It's just not my business model. So the process that I employ, first of all, in your case, look, you're the up 1% of gene pool. It wasn't hard for me to say you could play at the highest level. Michael Quinn, same thing, upper 1% of gene pool. Nicky Tinnell, right? All these great players that I've had. Scotty Rogers, Lovejoy, UVA. List goes on and on and on. Guys like you, it's not hard to say that I could see you playing at the next level because you have, I call it the animal instinct. You're an animal. Tintle was an animal. Michael Quinn was an animal. Scotty Rogers was an animal. Max Pomper was an animal, right? He played at UVA. Lovejoy, who played at UVA, animal, right? It's not hard to say that that type of athlete could play at the Division I level. But, the other 95%, it's kind of my job to say to the parents, okay, I think your son has a shot at Division I, but I'm not going to tell you that I can, in any way or form, guarantee that, number one. Number two, I could be wrong. And maybe Division I isn't the best place for him, because ultimately, as you've heard me say 1,001 times, it's about the education first. So I always say to the kids, look, it's not about Division I or Division III. It's about the best school possible. Use lacrosse to get in to the best academic institution possible. That's where it begins and ends. So I view my job as one of being a guide, because I've been through it so many times. There's very few iterations or permutations I haven't experienced. And once someone said to me, well, how'd you come up with the name Everest? Well, for a while, I was fascinated by these guys who climb Everest. You talk about endurance, that's the top of the food chain. But you don't climb Everest without a guide. You don't. You might as well shoot yourself in the head if you try and do it. Why do you hire a guide? Because they've been up and down, and they've experienced the worst weather. They've experienced hypoxia. They've experienced poor equipment up and down the peaks and the climbs. And you damn well better listen to them, because they've been there before, and the errors of omission aren't going to befall you if you pay attention to them. So that's kind of my mindset when it comes to working with student athletes. But again, you were a layup. I think the reason you didn't get the Division I bids when you first came to me, you came to me too late. You came on the back end, and then you got injured. But I'll tell you, Matt, I remember that fall tournament in Jersey we did, when Coach Baxter called me and said, freaking kid Glicini's an animal. I said, no shit. And then it was off to the races.
I don't think you're doing yourself justice on the guide thing, and I'll tell you why. Because one of my mentors, Dr. Gilbert, explains the population in these four quadrants. He says 10% are problem avoiders, right? They're very dependent on others. 60% are problem solvers. They do what they have to do to get it done. 27% are problem seekers. And I would say that you and I are in that 27%. You had a problem going on with your daughter, and when you had enough of feeling frustrated, you went and seeked it out and figured out the answers, and now you do it for families, and you're very helpful to guide them now. But you were seeking out a problem, and now you offer a service because you're an expert in it. And then he says 3% are problem transformers. And an example is in the 1970s, Dick Fosbury was the first person to go over the high jump in the Olympics back first. And it's called the Fosbury flop ever since. And then he's a problem transformer. So yes, you're a guide, but you were first and foremost a problem seeker. One of the things that I want to ask you about is early on in your Sting Club, it was based out of the lacrosse hotbed of Long Island. Times have changed, and all over the country, non-traditional lacrosse areas are popping up and developing deeper pools of talent. What are your views on the evolution of lacrosse from non-traditional areas and its impact on the college recruiting process and what you're seeing as it goes forward here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't really believe college coaches are predisposed to any particular region anymore, because you can get kids from Texas, from San Diego, from Seattle, from Ohio, from New Hampshire, who are just as skilled and tough and athletic as kids from Long Island and Maryland, right? Now, I've heard Andy Shea speak. I think once he alluded to the fact that it's a given that the New York contingent, the Long Island kids and the kids from Maryland at the Gilmans, the Landons, they're probably slicker with their stick skills, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're better athletes, right? So I think the beauty of this is that kids from all over the United States are popping up on every single roster, right? You look at Yale's roster, or UNC's roster, or Duke's roster, or Notre Dame's roster. Kids from every region of the country. And that's the beauty of it. Great athletes all over the place, and more of them are finding lacrosse. Now, the problem going forward, though, here's one of the things that I'm not happy about it, but I think the economic downturn as a result of COVID and all the athletic departments, their balance sheets are getting eviscerated. So I kind of think that there's going to be more programs that go under. I have no information that can substantiate that, but if you read about where all these schools are cutting back, unfortunately, I think non-revenue sports are at risk. So that's the sad part about this whole COVID debacle.
So awesome input. And to button up this part of our conversation about lacrosse and recruiting, and being that it is all about strategy, I'm still forever grateful that you recommended that I take a PG year. I think it completely changed my life, from Coach Chip Davis, who I've had on this podcast, the relationships I formulated from a time management and preparation standpoint. Day one of walking into Yale, I was really ready. Along the lines of pieces of advice or strategies that you would give to high school student athletes, their families, what is it about postgraduate year and its potential benefits from your opinion?
Well, funny story. I don't know if you remember this. When I met with your mom and dad about discussing the PG year, your mother, I remember this, slapped her hand on the table and said, "No way." I said, "Just listen, hear me out. I'm not saying you have to write a check to a boarding school, but hear me out. Here are the benefits: bigger, faster, stronger, more testosterone, better in the classroom, better prepared to matriculate at the college level that extra year. And listen, to be coached by someone like Chip Davis, it's invaluable. You become such a better athlete and such a better lacrosse player with that extra year under your belt, be it Deerfield, be it Choate, be it IMG Academy, where I now have 3 kids, by the way. I think it's an invaluable alternative if the families can afford it. That's the major issue. It's very expensive, and you know, a lot of families can't write that check. But if you can, and it allows you to restart the recruiting clock too, obviously, when you say you're going to reclass and do that PG year.
Awesome. So I want to come back to your personal journey now. This is kind of a question along the lines of, what do you know now that you wish you knew then? What is one or maybe 2 things that you know now as a veteran coach and businessman that you wish you knew 25, 30 years ago when you were first starting out?
That's a really good question. I don't know, man. I don't know that I have an answer to that. And I'll tell you why. Because for my whole life, I've never looked back. I sound like a cliche, but I don't. I don't look back. And as you know, I had some major issues. You know, my wife passed away. That 5-year period was torturous for me. And that reinforced the belief that you can't worry about what you may or may not have done or what you could have done in the past. It's an effort in futility. So as much as I know you probably want an answer that aligns with your question, I don't really have the answer, because I really do every single freaking day. I just live it.
It's a perfect answer. And I'll tell you why it's a perfect answer is because when I'm talking about the mental game and what it is and trying to get people to understand what mental training is all about, right? Because mental training gets a bad aura even to this day. It comes down to controlling the controllables. And what I say is stress lives in the past, anxiety lives in the future, and the expression of optimal performance is in the present. Right. So when you're talking about never looking back, you're talking about the mental game. You're talking about what can I control right now? Whatever happened in the past, right? There has to be a pivot that has to happen right now in order to move forward and have life in the future be greater than it is today. A bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn, and you're always turning. That's what I hear. And my next question invariably is just about the mental game. So Kobe Bryant is a perfect example of mental toughness, of mental training, because he studied great performers outside of the world of basketball. After UNC, you invested a decade of your life in the modeling industry. And now I see every single time I talk to you, you're bringing up special operation forces or a story of an extreme performer, right? So you're well equipped in the mental training, and success leaves clues. Are there any lessons that you took away from those experiences in the modeling industry or the stories that you read about that have helped you build your current career and lifestyle?
Well, I'll tell you one thing about the modeling industry that left, an impression on me. A lot of people abuse drugs. That was new to me, because I could count on one hand number of times I've had a sip of alcohol, and I never do drugs. But that industry was rife with it. And it just amazed me how people would ruin their lives by these addictions. But the other thing about that industry was you don't have any control over it. That infuriated me. You're either too tall, not tall enough, you're not lean enough, you're not blonde enough, you're not good looking enough, whatever it was. It was so arbitrary in terms of, who would get certain jobs. But the beauty of it was I got to travel all over the world. I lived in Europe for 2 years. I worked with some of the, big name designers. I was actually discovered by a guy named Bruce Weber, who was well known for doing the Calvin Klein and the Abercrombie and Fitch campaigns. And it was a pretty wild experience, freaking surfer dude from Long Island ending up in Milan. I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? Dating these Italian models. I'm like, Jesus Christ almighty, does it get any better than this? But, I'll tell you one of the things, and again, it's part of an answer to your question. I didn't mention this earlier. I did a deep dive into Eastern religion when I was in my sophomore year in college, and I became very involved in Zen Buddhism. I've studied it for my whole life. I studied with a monk for a year, actually, a Buddhist monk. I've visited over 12 temples. And if you look at the tenets of Buddhism and, the insistence upon meditation and quiet soul, quiet mind, that goes back to athletic performance. Because if you learn to quiet the mind, and part of the meditation for me was visualizing my end game, right? I think that does lead to peak performance, or it leads to not being afraid to fail because you have a little more confidence in your ability. So what I would always do when I first started doing the triathlons, I would meditate religiously. I would visualize. I would I used to go to float tanks before anyone even knew what they were, the immersion tanks. And I had my own tapes that would feed in, like, you will run a 7-minute mile. You will do this on your bike. You will not fear the water because, the swim part in a triathlon is brutal. Kicked in the face, swallowing salt water. I mean, I did a race where a jellyfish was stinging the shit out of me. And all this stuff could turn you into, a mope. But I always had in the back of my mind through all this meditation and visualization, just push through, don't look back. So I've always tried to remain competitive, and I've always tried to do different things. And I read, voracious reader. Just, I go through books, as you and I have discussed, books and a lot of the Navy SEAL guys. And that's rather than go out and carouse or play golf, if I have free time, I'm sitting down the stairs and I'm reading a book.
Will you give listeners like 1, 2, or 3 books that really stand out in your mind that have been?
Absolutely. Look, everyone knows Goggins, right? David Goggins. I have listened to his book, the audiobook in my car, 5 times. I read the book cover to cover 3 times. I watch the guy on any podcast I can catch, and that book had a profound effect on me. One of the other books that really got to me was a book called The Long Run by a guy named Matt Long, right? A fireman who was a triathlete and was training in New York City and got run over by a New York City bus. And when I say run over, they ran over him. I don't know how many bones the guy broke, and just, he was within inches of his life. And it's a phenomenal story about recovery and the willingness to endure. And I actually went to see the guy speak. I started crying when he got up to talk. I'm like, holy shit, because I heard his story in person, the pain, the suffering, the broken bones, the PT, his family members being concerned about him. Because, he turned to alcohol at some point, which is not uncommon when you have major trauma in your life. So that book had a profound effect on me. And one other one, and there's always a little side story here with me, as you well know. So I was training for triathlon down in Hilton Head, North Carolina. It's about 6-7 years ago. And I got hit by a car when I was riding my bike. Some guy tried to speed across an intersection, T-boned me, sent me flying into a brick retaining wall, snapped my bike in half, concussion, vertebrae, back, this, that. And, I was laid up. I couldn't get out of bed for, 6 weeks or something. I was busted up. And I remember saying to myself, I got to do something to change this. And I came across a book by a guy named Rich Rolls. It's called Finding Ultra. And he has great podcasts now. And he's an incredibly insightful guy. And again, another book that Rolls was a great swimmer at Stanford, but he got addicted to drugs and alcohol, and his life cratered. And they turned it around. Now he's one of the greatest endurance athletes on the planet. So that had a profound effect on me.
Those 3 books are all amazing. And what I love about this, and I don't want to cut you off if you want to keep going on the books, because I know you have a long list. It's interesting. I forget which motivator, and it's not coming to my mind right now, but old time motivator used to say, you need motivation just like you need a shower, or else it leads to stinking thinking. And I love that idea, right? Because you read David Goggins and listened to David Goggins Can't Hurt Me so many times, because we all need those reminders. We all need, just the same way we need a shower, right? And one of the things I wanted to bring up earlier on your talk about the Eastern religion deep dive and Zen Buddhism and quiet soul and quiet mind is that it's really binary in the fact that there are people that set goals and there are people that do not set goals, and you're either a wanderer or on a journey. There's one or the other. And if you are on a journey and you have a purpose and you have your goal setting, like so many people, you talk about goal setting and they just want to shut you off. And the reason is because it's monotonous and it's boring, but it's also your North Star and it's your why when the storms come, right? So you don't need goal setting every day, but you certainly need them when the storms come, because you have a higher purpose and it keeps you going. And that's where grit comes from. And that's where commitment and devotion comes from. And if you don't have those goals, you're just a wanderer, and you can say, oh, I didn't want it that bad anyway, right? I don't, because you don't have a specific aim, and human beings are activated by having an aim rather than attainment. And you said it indirectly, but I needed to put it out there that you've hit the almost several different pillars inside the mental game, from visualization, positive and negative, goal setting, meditation, mindfulness. It was all there. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and you've already brought up one of them, your weekly sheets. All peak performers have actions that they do repetitively, either every single day or at least definitely every single week. Do you do anything every single day or every week to stay physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually sound other than those weekly sheets?
Absolutely. I mean, my basement is a veritable gym. I have a Smith machine in there. I have a wind trainer. I have a spin bike. I have a treadmill. I have every ab machine known to man that was ever made. If it's on TV, I buy it. It's embarrassing, man. Every morning, my alarm goes off at 5:10. Boston, more than a feeling. I get up, I go right down to my basement, and I'm on my spin bike every freaking day. Now that's during the week. And then at night, I'll either go to the gym, do abs. And on the weekend, I have a 5-mile run that I do out at the beach. And then I'll do my ride along either Ocean Parkway or down at Robert Moses. So yes, I am an absolute unequivocal creature of habit every freaking day.
It's so important. It's so important. I had to make sure I get this right, because this morning during our applied sports psychology class, we had a guest speaker, Coach Mike Tolley. He was a sports writer for a long time, was at the 1980 Miracle game. He was at a bunch of amazing World Series games, and he left me with something today, and I'm always searching for that single idea. And I want to make sure I get this right. It has something to do with along the lines of, if it doesn't matter if you're doing something right, if what you're doing is not right. So the creatures of habit is so important, but you better make sure it's in an area that's going to lead you into a momentous down the road, right? Because you started out, this started at UNC for you, but it was the right thing that you got into. It was the right thing. I know you brought up drugs and alcohol several times, but if you make that small bad decision, it might not seem too big of a deal, but months and years down the road, it's a huge deal. So you saying creature of habit, that's omnipresent among all peak performers. It's the same monotonous, seemingly boring thing that has such a profound effect months and years down the road. And making sure it doesn't matter if you're doing something right, it must be the right thing that you're doing right, rather than this practice leads to permanence, right? Not practice doesn't lead to perfection. Practice leads to permanence. So make sure that you're doing the right thing, and then you're doing it every single day. I want to make sure that's really clear. Going down the road with you, due to the uncertainty from the pandemic and me talking about a question coming up here about further into the future, I know there's a lot of unknown, but what's different and what's going to be the same about Ken Miller? Where do you see yourself 3 to 5, 10 years down the road? Are you still coaching? Are you still working the same businesses you are? I ask this because you've accomplished so much on Wall Street with the families that you worked with inside Sting and Everest, thousands of student athletes. So what's next for Ken Miller?
Next is next, right? I'm just going to keep working out. I'm going to keep coaching. Because I love both of them to death. I have 4 great kids, and spend a lot of the time with them, and I'm in their lives. You know what? the fact of the matter is, it doesn't take much to please me, right? And I can handle rejection. I can handle mistakes because I'm consistently searching out these new individuals who are smarter than me. So that's what's next, the next book, whatever it's going to be. I mean, I have 5 in my iPhone that I'm going to, it's on my to-do read list. That's what's next. No grand plans about anything other than, as corny as it sounds, just living it day to day. The toughest thing to deal with, you're not at that yet, but as you get older, I have a journal here. I'm a very big fan of journaling. This is my fitness journal, and I keep all my workouts, and I monitor my BMI, my body fat, my minutes, my total miles. That is the hardest thing to deal with as you get older. It's really hard to, I go back because my sheets go back to when I started doing the triathlons. I used to consistently run 7-minute miles. Now I'm at like a 9-minute pace, and that's hard to deal with, right? So I always say to myself, and this is trying to answer your question, I'm going to do more speed work next week. I'm going to do more hills next week because I've read that speed work and hills maybe bring you back down to a quicker mile, right? Just continue doing what I'm doing, man, because I love it to death. I love it to death.
Something that's coming through very clearly as I'm looking at you talk about that, and it's in every word, it's vibrating through every word, is you obviously have insatiable curiosity, as you were about to give me a list of 100 books if I'll let you. But one thing right there was humility, right? You're okay with learning from somebody who's smarter than you. Was there an inflection point in your life where you found that humility? Was it that time at UNC, or is it something you developed over time? Because I was working with Ben Ives, our character coach for the San Diego Seals, and on our podcast, he said the number one thing any person has to have is they have to be coachable. They have to be willing to learn. And that's what I'm hearing in your answer, the humility and curiosity that comes through. So where did that humility come from? Was it over the years, or was there an inflection point in your life?
I think anyone would be foolish to state or assume that there aren't a multitude of people that are smarter than you and can teach you so many things about fitness, about commitment, about, living your life in general. So I've never been afraid to listen to other people. And again, all it takes is a Goggins to inject your life with rocket fuel, right? I mean, the day after I finished this book, I think I went out and ran 9 miles. It freaking killed me to put in 9 miles. I say to myself, if Goggins can run on freaking broken legs, you can run 9 fucking miles. Excuse my French. So the willingness to admit that you don't know it all, I have no problem with that. None whatsoever.
You're giving us so much on the mantra and motto quote, on the quotes and everything. I wanted you to come back and link in case there's one more that you can give us. But that whole Goggins and the rocket fuel, that's having a big enough reason why you'll figure out the how, right? You can't. It's much easier to act your way into a certain way of thinking than it is to think your way into a certain way of acting. And I know you'll love this. Tom Fleming won the New York City Marathon twice. He was averaging 135 to 150 miles per week. And his famous quote, you would think a guy like that loves running, right? He won the New York City Marathon twice. He's most famously quoted for saying, most days I didn't feel like running until I started running. Right. So that's like how actions change your attitude, movements change your moods, and motions change your emotions. Right. You're never going to get anywhere by being stagnant. Of course, everybody knows that, but you need to go out of your way to go find inspiration, to go get motivated. So, I mean, any focused or dedicated individual, like a ship, has a compass, like a sense of direction, like we talked about earlier, and an anchor to stay grounded. Are there any more mantras, mottos, or words that you find yourself telling your players like me, your clients and families that you work with that are particularly important to you?
Well, when I work with the kids and the families trying to make sense of the recruiting process, the first thing I tell the kids is, look, you own this, not your mom, not your dad, not your high school coach, not your club coach, not your uncle. You own it. Either you want to go to a great school and get a great education and be a dedicated athlete, or you don't, because there's no middle ground. So I always say that to the kids. Don't try and rely upon everyone else, because I can't tell you how many times a family will say to me, well, my brother's best friend at the hedge fund that he works at is friends with so-and-so at Harvard, Princeton, Dartmouth, or Penn. I'm like, yeah, so what? So are 10,000 other people. What the hell difference does that make? If your son's not telling each particular coach that he wants to be there, that he's dying to play for Andy Shea, or dying to play for Bresci, or dying to play for Lars Tiffany, how the hell are those coaches going to know? So I tell the kids, own it. Take responsibility for it. That doesn't mean you're going to end up at those schools. But what's going to happen is you're not going to look back and say woulda, shoulda, coulda. Because that's the most, look, I should have brought this story into focus earlier. I'm sorry I didn't. And this is how I try and frame it with the kids. So when I was at UNC, I had a pretty good early career. I started as a freshman. Sophomore year, I separated my shoulder. Junior year, a whole bunch of kids came in for Nassau Community College, transfers in, and they were all studs. And I never made it back to the starting lineup. And I kind of, for my junior year, I was blaming everybody. I was loafing. I wasn't pushing it in the sprints. I wasn't really pushing it in the drills. And I swear to God, for 10 to 15 years, I used to have these freaking nightmares where I was showing up at the game. I didn't have my helmet. I was showing up at the game. I didn't have my stick. I was showing up at the game. I didn't have my cleats. I got to the field late. And that was because I didn't put everything into it. I left something behind. So I tell the kids, don't be in a position where you look back and say, I didn't work as hard at this as I possibly could have. That's the one thing I try and get them to accept. And I'm also very upfront with them and saying, look, the likelihood of you ending up at a Division I school is de minimis. Not you in particular, but just do the numbers, right? How many attackmen are the Ivies going to recruit in 2021? I don't know, 15, 20? How many attackmen want to go to an Ivy League school? 5,000, 3,000? I don't know. The point I try to make to them is this ain't going to be easy. It's not going to be easy for anybody. But rather than sit around hoping someone else is going to help you, or hoping that Coach so-and-so is all of a sudden going to trip over you at field number 6 at a tournament in Baltimore on a Saturday, that's not how this thing works anymore. There's too many damn good kids for you just to sit there and hope that it's going to work, right? I mean, look, in your case, if I told you you had to run 90 miles to get a D1 school to look at you, you would have done it. If I told Michael Quinn, see that freaking brick wall over there? Put your head through it and then jump over it, Quinn would have done it. If I told Tintle, go over there and bench 700 pounds 7 times, he would have done it, right? The problem today is, as you well know, you deal with a lot of kids, there's so many distractions. So many distractions. The vast majority of kids are consumed by social media, are consumed by what everyone else is doing. And that, in my opinion, that stuff is just white noise. And it's like a drug. I say, I don't care what other kids are doing, nor should you. It's about you and your education. So put your head down, work your freaking ass off, and hopefully you end up at an Ivy, you end up at an Amherst, a Middlebury, a Bates, a Colby, a Bowdoin, a Washington Lee, all great schools. Because when you get to college, you're not going to like lacrosse. It's going to be hard. You're not going to be a Mark Glicini and start as a freshman. You're not going to be a Michael Quinn and be an All-American. The vast majority of kids will struggle to get on the field. I tell them that right up front. So be prepared, right? But get the best education, because that's all that really matters, right?
That was awesome, Coach. That was awesome. Life in 3 words: opportunities, choices, consequences. Angela Duckworth, who's the lead authority on grit right now, has a book out called Grit. And one of my mentors,
I read it.
Dr. Nick Molinaro, extends the definition, right? So passion, perseverant. I mean, you're definitely that. And then Dr. Nick Molinaro says to me, there's a third element to grit. It's a low need for positive reinforcement, right? So there's not always going to be somebody there that's clapping along, right? So the opportunities, choices, consequences, that's on a very micro level, right? That's like every single day. Did you put the work in or not, right? So when we're talking about mindset, it is binary, right? It's either put the work in or not. And then the macro level, right? You have an opportunity to go to a great school. What's the choice you're going to make? And there's always going to be a consequence. But I think the majority of the population understands that grit is important, especially the passion and the perseverance. But really, along the thread of so many distractions, the low need for positive reinforcement is a separator. It really is, right? Because there's not always going to be somebody there liking your picture and cheering you on all along the way, as you well know. And your story has illustrated and illuminated that to a T.
Before, I don't know how much time we got left, but I don't want to not tell the story about you at Hotbeds, because I always tell the kids about this, right? So your listeners can hear this. So I'll try and be quick. So Hotbeds was a great tournament. That was in Delaware. And Hotbeds it was, right? 90 degrees, 95 degrees. And at that point in time, you would have 4 full games a day, right? So remember that year we were in the championships. We had 5 games that day, starting at 8 o'clock. The championship game was at 1 o'clock. We won our way into the championship game, right? And 90% of the team was cramping up, except you. And I remember looking over, we had this one attackman, I forget the kid's name, great kid, but he was in agony on the sidelines, agony with cramps, right? I shouldn't be laughing about it. I mean, the kid was really hurting. And you're standing there, Coach, I'm ready to go in. I'm like, where'd you come from? Do you have like an extra lung or something? And there you go. I mean, I never saw someone that didn't get fatigued. And you ask me why I still coach, moments like that. Those are priceless. That stays with me forever. I remember looking at you like, dude, don't you get tired? Nope. There you go. You go out there, you knock someone on their ass, you get a ground ball, you go down and score. It just priceless.
Thank you, Coach. So
you're welcome.
The way I end it, being around so many high performers, student athletes, as a coach, as an experienced and well-accomplished businessman, I must ask you this final question, and I asked it to each guest. How do you define greatness? In your opinion, what is greatness?
Oh, man, that's a hard one. Greatness. I guess the way I would answer that is the ability to lead other people, to help them change their lives for the better, right? That's a skill, that's a gift from God, right? To motivate people. And you could be a great singer and motivate other kids to sing. You could be a great dancer and motivate other people to dance. You could be, a great boxer and motivate other kids to box, and help those people get to the next level. That's because to be a leader is not an easy thing, because most people want to take care of themselves, right? That's the nature of the beast. So I think the best way I can answer your question is to lead, and to lead multiple people to improve their lives. And the best example, of course, is someone like Tony Robbins, right? And guys like Tom Bilyeu, who runs Impact Theory, the guy who had Quest Nutrition. Those guys really, really changed people's lives. So that's greatness, in my opinion. At the micro level, I don't know, greatness, just getting your ass out of bed every goddamn day with all the challenges that you have. And you know, I know your mom had some challenges at one point when she was ill, right? But she just persevered, kept going, right? It was not easy for you and your dad, but that's greatness. Your mom just was like, hey, I'm going to get over this, right? I'm going to win. And she did. So it comes in little chunks and it comes in big chunks. But I think it's easy to define what greatness is not, right? People just sit around waiting for someone else to do it for them and bitching and moaning about all the stuff that they have to deal with. I mean, you know, I can't stand that. I'd rather get a stick in my eye than listen to people complain about their problems. I just walk away. And I think for the most part, and you know me pretty well, I'm a lone wolf. I don't, except for my time with the kids when I'm coaching and the families I deal with, I'm not out there socializing because people like to complain, which I just can't stand that. So I know that I went off on a tangent there.
It's a perfect answer on both a macro level and a micro level. And I feel the same way about my mother, and that's for sure. But Coach, thank you so much for coming on here. You talk about leading people. You've led me for a very long time. You're on a very short list of people that have been instrumental in me as a person, from a boy to a man to who I am today. So I can't thank you enough, and I appreciate our relationship.
My brother, my pleasure, brother. Love you, man.
Love you too, man.
All right. See you.